Russia started the spring with grand plans. A massive offensive, the collapse of the Donbass. Ukraine would finally crumble under Russia's might. That was the messaging out of the Kremlin as spring kicked off. But like so much that comes out of the mouths of Putin's cronies, the messaging was, shall we say, a little off. Russia's spring offensive was a failure, and the past year has seen the rise of something terrifying for Putin. Ukraine did something devastating to 100,000 of Russia's troops. A brilliant new tactic is in play, and it's put Putin's army on its deathbed. Even Russians can see the end coming, but Putin's head is buried so deep in the sand that he doesn't know what the battlefield is telling him. Russia is losing. All of the momentum rests with Ukraine. And if there is any doubt about this clear fact, we only need to look at the real numbers that have emerged from Russia's spring campaign. A massive offensive that was supposed to set the stage for the fall of the Donbass by fall has instead served as a brutal reminder to Russia that Ukraine only seems to be getting stronger. And the numbers come from the charismatic and notorious leader of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, Robert Brovdy. Today, June 4th, 2026, 358 days after the creation of the SBS Group, June 11th, 2025, the birds crossed the mark of 100,000 carcasses of enemy biomass with confirmed irretrievable and sanitary losses, Brovdy roared in a Telegram post. The Russian worms, as Brovdy calls them, have suffered a spring that will live in memory for years, and the number of soldiers that Ukraine has eliminated in just 1 year is especially humiliating when taken in the context of the size of the force that Putin thought he would need to take all of Ukraine. Way back in February 2022, when Russia launched the full-scale invasion, Putin dedicated 180,000 soldiers to the cause. These soldiers attacked on 4 axes: Kyiv, the Donbass, the southern region of Tavria, and the Siversk-Slobozhanskaya region. The idea was simple: unleash a firestorm that would lead to Ukraine collapsing in 3 days. But Ukraine survived, and now Ukraine has eliminated enough Russian soldiers to account for more than half of the force that Putin originally thought would be enough to topple his enemy. That's an embarrassment. A clear indictment of Putin's complete failure to live up to the image of the great military tactician that he had created for himself. But even more than any of that, what Ukraine pulled off in the spring of 2026 is a credit to the country's tactical brilliance, as it's taken a weapon that has defined the Ukraine war and turned it into the true game changer that Putin never saw coming. Things are starting to shift in Ukraine. But before we dig into why, how about a few more numbers? The turnaround in Ukraine's fortunes can be traced directly back to the formation of the Unmanned Systems Forces, or USF, of the Ukrainian army on June 11, 2025. Ukraine had made heavy use of drones long before the creation of this force, of course, but with the USF came systemization, control, collaboration. The formalization of a drone strategy that began wreaking havoc on Russia in the latter half of 2025 and has evolved into a true game changer in the Ukraine war as we head toward the midpoint of 2026. The 100,000 plus Russian soldiers who now lie dead or injured as a result of these drones are just the starting point. Since its formation, the USF has conducted 350,000 verified strikes against Russian targets as part of 1.65 million combat missions in just a few days shy of a year. That's 5,000 sorties per day, and the numbers only get worse for Russia from here on out. The USF has spent the last 12 months destroying 248 Russian air defense vehicles, 817 of Putin's tanks, and 1,379 armored vehicles, including personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles. There's a lot more. Under the force of Ukraine's drones, Russia has lost 4,890 artillery systems, Brovdy declares. That's devastating for Russia on the front. Artillery is supposed to provide the fire support that enables infantry to advance. But it's the Russian artillery that is on fire, and Russian soldiers are dying in droves as a result. And it keeps on going. 342 self-propelled artillery systems, 13 aircraft and helicopters, 281 multiple-launch rocket systems, a staggering 26,430 logistics vehicles, and even more reconnaissance and strike drones. All have fallen to the power of the USF, as Ukraine's systematic approach to the drone warfare that it innovated is delivering brutal payback to Russia for Putin's actions. Then we come back to the casualties. First, remember this: the figures we've shared come from the USF alone. Russia has experienced many hundreds of thousands more casualties over the past year when taking all of Ukraine's defenses and units into account. Second, the exact number of Russian troops destroyed by the USF since the unit's June 11, 2025 formation is 100,082. Of those, 53,477 were killed and 46,605 were wounded. Russia's dead-to-wounded ratio is completely out of whack. The DePay Institute highlighted that in a study that examined several 20th century wars involving the US military. In all, the killed-to-wounded ratio was always in favor of wounded over killed. World War I saw a ratio of 3.83 wounded to every soldier killed. In World War II, it was 2.41 wounded to 1 killed. The Korean War was 2.8, the Vietnam War was 3.14, and the Afghanistan War was 9.98, all wounded to every 1 killed. And yet Russia is experiencing more killed than wounded. That's catastrophic. And it shows us that Ukraine has become a more efficient killing machine than Putin could have ever imagined when he launched his plan to destroy Ukraine in 3 days back in February 2022. None of the USF's figures are conjecture either. Every single number that Brovdy reports comes from Ukraine's Delta system. Everything is tracked and verified. The evidence is in the system. All Ukraine has to do is tot up the numbers to see that a year of USF operations had delivered devastation to Russia. And for the next 12 months, the USF has set itself a new target, 200,000 casualties, double what it has inflicted during its first year of existence. Let's bring things back to the spring offensive. The USF's amazing figures slot nicely into a 3-month period where Russia had lost enormous amounts of meat for very little gain. According to United 24 media, Russia's spring has cost it almost 100,000 soldiers, many of whom have been taken out by USF drones. In the 2 months between March and April, the outlet says, Russia managed to occupy around 300 square kilometers of Ukraine. The period between February and March had seen Ukraine liberate between 400 and 500 square kilometers, which suggests the situation on the ground right now is pretty much a standstill for Russia. That assessment is backed by figures from the Institute for the Study of War, ISW. It says that Ukraine's forces have largely halted the spring and summer offensive, with April and May both seeing Russia record a net loss of territory when taking the infiltration units that are operating in the grey zones that neither side controls out of the equation. In April, Russia had a net loss of 116.01 square kilometers, the ISW reports. May was worse for Russia. About 281.10 square kilometer net loss signaled a low point on a scale that Russia hasn't seen since Ukraine's large counteroffensive in the summer of 2023. Maybe standstill is a misnomer. Russia is actively losing ground to Ukraine. The spring has been a failure for Russia. Summer isn't going to be much better, especially as the USF intensifies its strikes. If the USF can start hitting the monthly numbers that would lead it to claiming 200,000 casualties over the next 12 months, then a Russian military that is already on its deathbed will be buried 6 feet under. Recent reporting points out that Russia's long-range attacks against Ukraine's civilian population have intensified in lockstep with the failure of Putin's forces on the ground. This is supposed to be a showcase of Russian aerial strength. It isn't. What we're seeing in these increased attacks on Ukraine's population centers is the last dying gasp of a Russian offensive that has already crumbled. Russia is doing things like sending 1,500 drones into Kyiv and the surrounding territories in a single day because it's desperate. Big drone numbers make it seem as though Russia holds the initiative on the battlefield. The USF's numbers demonstrate that isn't the case. But more than that, they signal an evolution in Ukraine's strategy that Russia can't handle. This evolution has changed everything about the Ukraine war, but a quick side note before we get into that, this is The Military Show. If you're getting value from the channel, now is the perfect time to subscribe so you never miss one of our videos. So Ukraine's evolved tactics, what are they? We said earlier that drones have been playing a key role in Ukraine's strategy for years, but what the USF's numbers show us is that what was once a case of Ukrainian units hitting Russia with drones without real coordination has transformed into a systematic campaign spearheaded by the USF that has brought the power of robotics to the battlefield. The tide is turning in Ukraine because the robot army that the country has spent years building is now larger and more organized than ever before. Ukraine is now the world leader in military drone technology. The Observer says that the country is producing at least 4 million drones per year. That number will keep on climbing. In January, Euromaidan Press reported that Ukraine plans to build 7 million drones in 2026. Right now, drones are estimated to be inflicting 80% of battlefield casualties on both sides. But it's Ukraine that is coming out on top in this critical area of the war. How? The expansion of the kill zones. Again, Ukraine's kill zones are far from being a new addition to the war in 2026. They've existed for a long time, though they have undergone plenty of transformations since the USF was formed. The earlier versions of the kill zones stretched for about 10 to 20 kilometers beyond the front and into the grey zones just behind. The idea was simple. make the very concept of traveling to the front lethal for Russia's soldiers. With its kill zones, Ukraine has been eliminating thousands of Putin's patsies along with hundreds of units of equipment before they ever get into a position where they could threaten the frontline fortifications. It was already a brilliant strategy, now it's been supercharged. Russia's big problem is that the kill zones have grown larger than ever before. A new generation of middle-range drones has taken what used to be zones that stretched for a dozen or so kilometers and made them so they cover huge portions of the Russian rear. And we're seeing it all over. In Luhansk, the skies are controlled by Ukrainian drones, per Ukraine's 3rd Army Corps. Those drones are able to fly over territory that is occupied by Russia because Putin's forces have no answer for Ukraine's expansion. We're seeing something similar in Donetsk, where Ukraine's drones have obtained fire control over the Donetsk airport that Russia uses as a logistical node and drone launch and storage site to support operations in the occupied territories. Ukraine has also used its drones to establish aerial control over large portions of the R280 highway that connects Russia to Crimea. The kill zones now stretch for around 100 kilometers. That's the evolution that has made the sorts of numbers that the USF reports possible. But what happens next is really going to catch Russia off guard. The reason why the USF claims that it's going to double its numbers during its second year of existence isn't just because of Ukraine's evolving kill zone strategy. There's more to it than that. Data is playing as much a part in Ukraine's success as the drones, as Ukraine's forces are pulling ahead of Russia in terms of the level and quality of the battlefield intelligence they're gathering. That was revealed in a June 4th report by the Wall Street Journal, which revealed that there is a secret weapon behind the drone disaster that Ukraine has delivered to Russia. Ukraine's kill chain has been sped up enormously due to Ukraine now having access to real-time satellite imagery that can be beamed straight to soldiers' phones. That imagery, combined with the thousands of reconnaissance drones beaming real-time footage of Russian positions back to the Delta system, is allowing Ukraine to identify and strike targets faster than at any other point during the war so far. This aspect of Ukraine's drone evolution has led to the delivery time of geospatial intelligence to Ukraine's troops dropping by 90%, practically doubling the speed at which Ukraine can go into action with its drones. The Ukrainian military's deployment of the program marks the first known instance of unclassified commercial satellite imagery going directly to a soldier to guide real-time battle decisions, according to the companies and military analysts, the journal says of Ukraine's new approach to intelligence gathering. The commercial satellites that Ukraine is leveraging have been used in the past to update Google Maps and conduct benign operations, such as identifying illegal fishing. Now Ukraine uses them to find Russian assets, and when it finds those assets, the USF and Ukraine's other drone units jump into action. This isn't a subtle shift on the battlefield, it's the complete rewriting of the rules of drone warfare. That's crazy to say given that the Ukraine war has already served as the progenitor for a new style of robotic warfare that hasn't been seen up to this point. However, it's also typical of Ukraine. The country's military minds never rest on their laurels. Ukraine adapts constantly, taking advantage of every advance that is made to hurt Russia. That's what we're seeing with the expanded kill zones and the use of commercial satellite feeds delivering intelligence to soldiers. Ukraine stays 2 steps ahead of Russia, and the numbers that the USF and the Ukrainian military as a whole are putting up now demonstrate the country's approach works. What does this mean for Putin? Russia's leader is losing control over the Ukraine war at a critical juncture. It's not just troops dying by the tens of thousands and equipment being destroyed in the occupied rear. In Russia itself, Ukraine's drones now fly so deep that they were effortlessly able to strike St. Petersburg on the eve of the Russian Davos economic event that Putin tries to use to showcase the strength of Russia's economy. Before that failure of Russia's defenses, Putin had been forced to scale back Moscow's annual Victory Day parade to the point where it involved none of Russia's military hardware. That happened for the simple reason that Russia was scared of Ukraine's drones hitting the hardware as it was paraded. Ukraine's drones are hitting deeper and harder than ever, and the intensity of the frontline and kill zone campaigns isn't scaling back. Again, it's evolution. Ukraine keeps on building stronger and more advanced drones, and it's more organized in how it uses these drones than it's ever been before. That's what over 100,000 Russian casualties and tens of thousands of units of equipment caused by the USF in a year really means for Russia. This isn't a crescendo, it's a launching pad for much worse to come. Russia's army is on its deathbed, and Ukraine is preparing to inflict the final blows to Putin's 2026 campaign. And it's not just us saying that. All over Russia, Putin's people are telling him that it's time to end the war. They know what Putin refuses to accept. It's all over for Russia now. No matter where you look, you can see the wellspring of discontent forming. It's visible among Russia's elite, the Wall Street Journal reported on June 3rd. All over Russia, some of the more hawkish people at the top of the country's food chain are telling Putin that it's time to stop. Among them is Oleg Zaryov, who was once loved by the Kremlin because he's a former Ukrainian lawmaker who has supported what Putin is trying to do in Ukraine since 2014. At one point, Zaryov was being groomed to lead the puppet government that Putin wants to install in Ukraine. Now, the turncoat has betrayed his master, as he has warned his followers on Telegram not to buy into the illusion of an inevitable Russian victory. Others, such as the head of Russia's drone warfare center, Alexei Chadaev, are claiming that Russia is not only on a path to a stalemate, but is heading to a full-scale defeat due to Ukraine's constant evolution. The view at the top is reflected by Russian military bloggers, often the biggest evangelists for Putin's war. Even they are starting to turn on their leader. Zaryov is just the start. Pro-Kremlin lawyer and military blogger Ilya Remezlo has publicly announced that he no longer supports Putin, giving 5 reasons for his turnaround, and even going so far as to claim that Putin is an illegitimate president who should be put on trial for war crimes. Rats tend to flee a sinking ship. That's what we're seeing in Russia now. Those who were enriched by Putin's invasion in the early days are now going to great pains to let the world know that they no longer support their leader. This is self-preservation, and in many ways it's pathetic. But it doesn't change the reality that Putin now faces, which is that everybody except for him sees the way that the wind is blowing. Even the Russian people, who are bombarded with Kremlin propaganda to an insane degree, are telling Putin that it's time to stop. According to TVP World, a poll conducted by Russia's non-governmental Levada Research Center back in February showed that only 24% of respondents want the war to continue. 67% of those quizzed said that the time was right for Russia to move toward peace negotiations. And all of this was back in February. The anti-war sentiment in Russia is only growing as more drones strike Russian territory and numbers like those shared by the USF come to light. Putin won't end the war. He has already rejected Zelensky's latest calls for peace talks, claiming that there is no point, as he tried to make it seem that Ukraine's president isn't serious about wanting peace. That's a lie. What Putin means is that he knows that Russia hasn't got any cards left. The leverage is gone. Any peace that would come from talks won't deliver what Putin wanted, which means his entire invasion will go down in history as a catastrophic waste of Russian life. Putin doesn't want that to be his legacy, so he forces the fight to go on, even as the death rattle of the Russian army echoes throughout his country. Putin can't escape his legacy. All he can hope for now is that he dies before he goes down in the history books as the failure that he knows he is. When even Russians are telling him that it's time to stop, Putin should know that it's all over. And we're seeing the tide turning everywhere in Ukraine, especially in Luhansk. We mentioned earlier that Ukraine now controls the skies in a territory that Russia has occupied since the beginning of the war. Find out how Ukraine did it and what it all means for Russia by watching our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show as we chart the demise of a Russian empire that Putin has failed to build. And thank you, as always, for watching.